ISO is a great tool that we as photographers can use to help us achieve the perfect exposure, and it allows us to have full control over our aperture and shutter speed too. These conditions are just incredible. So we'll be heading back to the coast in just a minute, but I just want to talk about a few points here first. So if you're new to photography, let me briefly explain what ISO is, and then we'll get on to 7 real-world reasons why you should consider raising your ISO for better photos. ISO refers to the camera's sensitivity to light. So a high ISO value makes the camera more sensitive, but it may introduce more noise to the image in the process. So I tend to adjust ISO to control exposure in various lighting conditions, while balancing the trade-off between sensitivity and image quality. And as you can see here, this shot at ISO 6400 is a lot more noise than the one shot at ISO 125. So that's probably why we want to keep our ISO as low as we possibly can. So the first point is a very generalised point and covers many shooting scenarios, but quite often we raise ISO to obtain a faster shutter speed when the ambient light is too low. So say in the current lighting conditions we have our aperture set to f8 because that's the amount of depth of field that we require for the particular scene we're shooting, and at ISO 100 we have a slow shutter speed of say 1/25 of a second. If we raise the ISO by 2 stops to 400, we can quicken the shutter speed by 2 stops, giving us the same exposure, but now we're at 1/100th of a second instead of 1/25. So that's a very generalised point. So let's get on to some more very specific reasons why raising ISO can be very, very useful indeed. So this Astro image here was taken at ISO 3200, and there's a very specific reason I raised my ISO that much for this particular shot. Now with astrophotography, you find you don't have as much flexibility over your aperture and your shutter speed as you do when you're shooting in daylight. So for shooting the Milky Way, you need to let a lot of light into the sensor so we can see all of those wonderful stars. So typically we need to have a very wide aperture, and I actually shot this at f2 on my f1.4 wide angle lens because it gives a little bit sharper results at that aperture, and the shutter speed was 13 seconds long. Now I could have let my shutter speed go for a longer duration, which would have brought in more light, but what we'll start to see is that the stars will lose their circular shape and they'll become lines due to the Earth's rotation. So at f2 and 13 seconds, my photo would have been completely black had I shot at my base ISO of 125. And that's the reason why I raised my ISO to 3200, as it allows the sensor to soak in more light and show the Milky Way in all its glory. Now, this is an interesting point. On most cameras, dynamic range will decrease as the ISO is increased, which is another reason not to raise ISO unless we actually need to do it. But a lot of new cameras now have a dual native or dual gain ISO, which loosely means they have 2 base ISOs. Now, I don't really understand the science behind it all, but let's take a look at the popular Nikon Z8 and we can see where the second ISO starts by that second peak in the graph. Now, if we look at this graph, we've got dynamic range on the vertical axis and ISO along the horizontal. And we can clearly see that ISO 400, the photographic dynamic range, is 8.73 stops. But when the ISO is increased to 500, we get 9.54 stops. So not far off another full stop of dynamic range, which is pretty awesome. And because of the dual ISOs, I suspect you'll probably get a cleaner image too by raising the ISO to 500. So if you find yourself shooting at ISO 400 on the Nikon Z8, it might be beneficial to boost the ISO a third of a stop for overall better results. Now, of course, all cameras are different, aren't they? So it's well worth checking out your camera to see how it performs. And you can see my camera, the Fuji X-H2, which is the black line on the graph, is a little bit different to the Nikon Z8. So fairly comparable, but yeah, a little bit different. So it's well worth taking a look. And obviously, I haven't tested this out. I don't own a Nikon Z8. I'm just going from this test graph on the Photons to Photos website. So, you know, make of that what you will. But I think it's a very interesting point and another reason to actually raise ISO. So another reason to raise ISO is when we use filters. So we tend to use filters when we want to get a slow shutter speed for a creative effect. So by placing a filter over the lens, we can reduce the light entering the camera. So I've got a 3-stop, a 6-stop and a 10-stop filter, which is great. But if I'm after a very specific shutter speed, I might find a 6-stop filter, for example, is stopping too much light. So this is where I'd raise my ISO as required. If I raise my ISO by 1 stop, I'm effectively turning my 6-stop filter into a 5-stop filter. So it's a really good little trick for fine-tuning motion within your scene. Next, we have freezing motion within the scene. So say it's a windy day and the trees are moving around, or you're shooting people that are moving. To get a sharp photo, we're going to need a fast enough shutter speed to freeze that motion. Now, how quick that actually needs to be will depend on how quick those objects are moving about. So raising ISO will allow us to raise the shutter speed, which in turn will help us freeze that motion within the scene to get a sharp photo. Now, similar to the previous point, if we're hand holding the camera, we're going to need to get a quick enough shutter speed so we don't see our own body movement in the final photo. So if the ambient light is very low, then boosting ISO will again help us to get a fast enough shutter speed to freeze our own body movements and motion. Next up, we've got telephoto photography, and it's surprising how much camera shake can be introduced into the final image when we're zoomed into, say, 200 or 300 mil. And if you follow the rule of thumb where your shutter speed is equal to your focal length, it can sometimes be quite difficult to get a fast enough shutter speed to freeze camera shake. So again, this is another example of when we might choose to raise ISO. Also, if it's particularly windy and you've got your camera on a tripod, you may also find that it may be better to have a quicker shutter speed than you might think. So again, don't rule out boosting ISO when the camera's on a tripod, because it could save your shot, especially if you've got the telephoto lens on. So let's head out to the coast now, where the weather is particularly dramatic. And fingers crossed we get some banging images. It is so dramatic right now. I can just hear the sound of the waves crashing up against the cliff faces. The open ocean swell is between 12 and 15 feet right now, so it's pretty epic out here on the west coast. Got some amazing cloud detail too, some patches of blue sky, so yeah, moments of amazing light. I think it's going to be a great evening. I've got 2 places that I want to shoot this evening, 2 places that I've shot before in very, very boring conditions, so I'm hoping this could be the moment for something special. Let's crack on, get a bit further down the coast and see if we can make an image or 2 this evening. Oh, can't wait for this. So, this is the first shot I want to shoot. So dramatic. Just hope the light is working right for this particular scene, because we've got this amazing sea stack here with this white water splashing all over it. Looks incredible right now, but the sun is right behind it, so it'd be interesting to see whether I can make a good exposure or not, but let me give it a go anyway. So I had to be pretty quick setting this up, because the light behind is absolutely incredible now. I've got these wonderful diffused rays of light coming down, illuminating the backdrop. I'm not bracketing or anything like that, I'm just going to take it in one exposure. Shutter speed is 125th of a second, f11, ISO 125, and my histogram's nicely balanced in terms of I'm not losing any detail in the highlights or shadows. But these conditions are so epic right now, they really are. When I'm looking at it on the back of the camera here, the shadows are very, very dark, but I think that adds to the mood and drama of the image. And now we're getting some rain too. Ah, my lens is getting wet. Woohoo! Epic conditions, it's just so wild out here right now. The light is around the headland there, but there's so much drama in this bay. Continually having to wipe my lens from rain. and sea spray. But thoroughly enjoying this. Getting a bit of pink colour in the sky too. Every time the sets roll through, just grab a few images. Coming in f11, 13th of a second, ISO 125. And I do apologise about the wind, there's nothing I can do about it. Whew, what a wild evening it's been. It's been incredibly difficult to film and photograph because of the heavy rainstorm we had and the wind and these waves crashing over these cliffs with the sea spray coming up over the top. It's been so dramatic. I really do hope I got a couple of good images. I can't really tell at the minute, it's just yeah, too chaotic trying to film and everything, but I've thoroughly enjoyed this evening anyway, and I do hope you got some good tips from those points about raising ISO earlier on in the video. Shame I couldn't really demonstrate that this evening, I just didn't really need to use it this evening, but yeah, hope you got something from that anyway. If you did enjoy it, please be sure to check out this video up here, which I think you'll probably enjoy too. If you really liked it, please be sure to give it a like, because that really does help me out, and consider subscribing for more content like this. If you'd like to support the channel further, then why not check out my photography zine. All of the proceeds go into this channel, helping us reach new places. Anyway, until next week, take care, and I'll see you all very soon.